You are probably holding a piece of their technology right now, looking through it to see me. Yet you likely haven't thought about this company in years, if ever. It is one of the oldest industrial giants in America, a firm that survived the Civil War, powered Thomas Edison's first light bulbs, and nearly went bankrupt multiple times before accidentally saving the modern world. Today, we are taking apart the story of Corning, the 175-year-old glassmaker that didn't just survive the digital revolution, it built the literal glass pipes and screens that make the internet and your smartphone possible. From a failed project in the 1960s to a desperate phone call from Steve Jobs in 2007, this is how a company that started by making glass jars for pickles ended up connecting the entire planet. Our story doesn't begin with high-tech lasers or silicon chips, but with a family and a furnace. In 1851, Amory Houghton founded the Bay State Glass Company in Massachusetts, which eventually moved to a small town in New York that would take the company's name, Corning. For the first few decades, they were just another glass company, making the kind of things you'd expect in the 19th century: goblets, jars, and lenses for railroad signals. But unlike their competitors, the Houghtons had a strange obsession. They didn't just want to make glass, they wanted to understand the science of it. They were among the first industrial companies in America to establish a dedicated research laboratory, a move that seemed like a luxury at the time, but would eventually become their greatest weapon. The first major pivot happened in 1879. A young inventor named Thomas Edison was struggling with a problem. He had the idea for the incandescent light bulb, but he couldn't find a glass envelope that was thin enough to be efficient, but strong enough to hold a vacuum without shattering. He turned to Corning. The glass blowers at Corning didn't just make a few bulbs. They developed a way to mass-produce them, literally lighting up the world. This established a pattern that Corning would follow for the next century and a half. An inventor has a world-changing idea, but they can't make it real because the material doesn't exist. Corning then steps in to invent the material. But glass is a fickle business. By the early 20th century, the company was looking for new ways to use their expertise. This led to one of their most famous accidental consumer hits. In 1913, a Corning physicist named Jesse Littleton brought home a sawed-off bottom of a battery jar made of a new, heat-resistant glass the company had developed for railroad lanterns. He asked his wife, Bessie, to bake a sponge cake in it. The cake baked faster, more evenly, and the glass didn't break. That battery jar became Pyrex, a brand that would eventually be in almost every kitchen in America. It was a massive success, but it also masked a deeper truth about the company. Their real value wasn't in the products they sold to consumers, but in the specialized, high-performance glass they sold to industry. Fast forward to the 1960s, a decade that would define Corning's modern identity. The world was beginning to think about communication. Computers were getting larger, and the old copper wires used for telephone calls were reaching their physical limits. Scientists began to theorize that light, rather than electricity, could be used to carry information. The idea was to use glass fibers as pipes for light. The problem? Even the clearest glass available at the time was too dirty. If you tried to send light through a mile of standard window glass, the light would disappear within inches because of impurities. To make fiber optics work, you needed glass so pure that you could see through a block of it miles thick. In 1966, a physicist named Charles Kao published a paper suggesting that if someone could create glass with an attenuation of less than 20 decibels per kilometer, optical communication would become possible. Most of the scientific community thought it was impossible. But at Corning, a team led by Robert Maurer, Donald Keck, and Peter Schultz took up the challenge. They spent 4 years in the lab, failing over and over again. They weren't just refining glass, they were reinventing it using a process called vapor deposition, essentially growing glass from gas to ensure absolute purity. In 1970, they did it. They produced a fiber with an attenuation of 17 decibels. It was the 4-minute mile of the glass world. They had invented the highway for the information age. However, inventing something and making money from it are two very different things. For the next 20 years, Corning sat on fiber optics. The infrastructure didn't exist, and the lasers needed to send the signals were still in their infancy. The company poured billions into a technology that had no immediate market. It was a massive gamble that nearly broke them. But when the internet explosion of the 1990s hit, Corning was the only company on Earth that could produce the sheer volume of high-quality fiber needed to wire the planet. They went from a quiet glassmaker to a high-flying tech stock. And then, the bubble burst. In 2001, the telecommunications market collapsed. Corning's stock price plummeted from $113 to $1.10. They were months away from total liquidation. This is where the story takes its most dramatic turn. To survive, Corning had to look into its vault of failed inventions. In the early 1960s, they had developed a project called Project Muscle. It was a chemically strengthened glass that was incredibly tough, but it was a total commercial failure. No one wanted it. It was too expensive for windshields and too specialized for anything else. They branded it ChemCore and put it on a shelf, where it sat for nearly 40 years. Then, in 2007, a phone call changed everything. Steve Jobs was weeks away from launching the first iPhone. The prototypes had plastic screens, and Jobs was furious because he had carried a prototype in his pocket with his keys, and the screen was already covered in scratches. He wanted glass, but it had to be thin, light, and virtually indestructible. He called Wendell Weeks, the CEO of Corning. Jobs explained what he needed, and Weeks told him about the old ChemCore technology. Jobs, in his typical fashion, told Weeks he wanted enough of it to cover millions of iPhones in 6 months. Weeks told him it was impossible. The factory in Kentucky that made it had been converted to other uses. Jobs reportedly stared at him and said, "Yes, you can do it. Get your mind around it. You can do it." Corning did it. They pulled the 40-year-old failed invention off the shelf, refined it in record time, and rebranded it as Gorilla Glass. When the first iPhone launched, the screen wasn't just a window. It was a structural component that changed how we interact with technology. Today, Gorilla Glass is on billions of devices worldwide. It saved the company, but more importantly, it proved that Corning's greatest asset isn't a specific product, it's their ability to wait. They are a company that operates on a different timescale than Silicon Valley. They are willing to invent something today that might not be useful for 50 years. But the story doesn't stop at your phone screen. While you were distracted by Gorilla Glass, Corning was quietly solving other global problems. In the 1970s, when the US government passed the Clean Air Act, car manufacturers were scrambling to find a way to reduce emissions. They needed a ceramic substrate for catalytic converters that could withstand extreme heat and chemical reactions. Corning, using their expertise in material science, invented a honeycombed ceramic structure that is now in almost every car on the road, preventing billions of tons of pollutants from entering the atmosphere. Even played a role in looking at the stars. When NASA needed a mirror for the Hubble Space Telescope, they turned to Corning to create a massive 2.4-meter piece of ultra-low expansion glass. And when the James Webb Space Telescope needed to see into the deepest reaches of the universe, Corning was there again. They are the company that makes the glass for the things we can't afford to have fail. So, why does this matter? Because Corning represents a dying breed of American industry. They are a company that still makes things, real, physical things, in an era of apps and software. They prove that you can't have a digital world without a physical foundation. Every time you send a text, it travels through Corning fiber. Every time you drop your phone and the screen doesn't shatter, you are benefiting from a 60-year-old failed experiment. They are the invisible giants of the modern age. The lesson of Corning is one of persistence and the value of fundamental research. In a world obsessed with quarterly results and immediate returns, they are the outliers who think in decades. They understand that glass isn't just a transparent barrier, it's a versatile material that can be engineered to carry light, resist fire, or survive the vacuum of space. They started by making glass for Thomas Edison, and today, they are making the glass that will likely power the next century of innovation. As we look toward the future, Corning is already working on the next impossible materials. They are developing flexible glass that can fold like paper for the next generation of smartphones. They are creating glass that can kill bacteria on contact for hospitals. And they are continuing to push the limits of how much data a single strand of fiber can carry. The company that almost died in 2001 is now more vital than ever. So, the next time you look at your phone, or look through a window, or even just turn on a light, remember the 175-year-old glassmaker from a small town in New York. Remember the physicists who spent 4 years failing in a lab to invent fiber optics, and the CEO who stood up to Steve Jobs to make Gorilla Glass a reality. Corning is a reminder that the most important technologies are often the ones we take for granted, and that the road to the future is paved with the glass of the past. If you've ever wondered how the world got so connected, so fast, the answer is simpler than you think. It's all in the glass. Subscribe if you want to keep exploring the companies that built the world, one invention at a time. And let us know in the comments, what's the oldest piece of tech you still use every day? We'll see you in the next one.